Everybody, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement, bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training. And before I get started, please definitely subscribe and share these videos with someone for whom it might make a difference in their fitness or adapted PE programming for their autism and neurodivergent life skill athletes. Let's get after it. So, in this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, I'm going to be talking about some of the similarities, differences, and complexities of individual versus group fitness training. And certainly there are some misconceptions and mythologies, not that we're talking about three-headed dragons or Bigfoot or cryptids. Some of my athletes are really into cryptids. It's kind of cool. I've learned some things. Cryptids from all over the world. Google image search that. Gets pretty hairy and scaly. And then stuff with claws. Anyhow, when we're looking at the decision-making process and the practicalities of individual versus group programs, sometimes we have a choice, we ourselves as the coaches, as the providers, and sometimes we do not. So we have to take that into account first. So for example, in most adaptive physical education programs, you're not going to have a one-to-one session, and you're also not going to be able to separate out individuals into perhaps the most effective or the most appropriate group for them. You have who you have in the group, and we can still make this a really workable situation for all of the athletes in that program. However, there are certain things that we need to take into account to make it the best possible situation and lead our athletes through, to my two favorite words, training effect, right? Ultimately, what is the outcome of the program? When we are delivering exercise programs, what do we want to see happen? What is going to generalize to the real world skills in activities of daily living? That is ultimately our goal, so that's what we want to accomplish regardless of whether we're working with an individual or a group. So in that group dynamic where you may not have control over who is in that group, there's certainly ways to work around it. If you have choice, so if you are running your own program, if this is your own business, your fitness practice or your clinic, and you can determine, okay, this is going to be a good pairing of 2 or 3 or even 4 athletes. After 4, it can get a little bit more complex. Certainly some major considerations there, but if we're talking about a dyad or a triad or a quad 4 athletes, and you have the decision-making capability there on determining who is going to be in that group, it's a really good idea to have a group readiness list. I was looking for the word list. To have a group readiness form or list or criteria, which is the other word that I should have said in the beginning, but having group readiness criteria for every individual, and I'll get into why in just a little bit. If you are running one-to-one programs, the one-to-one program is going to be likely the most effective, obviously for the individualization of that program, but one of the other advantages, and a major advantage of a one-to-one fitness program, is that for just about every set and just about every repetition that this athlete is performing during that session, you can be there to guide, you can be there to coach, you can be there to observe so that the athlete is getting that one-to-one attention. Now, oftentimes, particularly for our autism and neurodivergent athletes, that athlete may need a one-to-one programming situation because they become easily dysregulated or overwhelmed in a group program. And one of the questions that comes up a lot, that winds up in my inbox, or I get a DM saying, what about individual versus group programs, specifically regarding socialization. So socialization with a group and you know, making friends and interacting is fine when it is fine. And there are a number of different factors that I don't often see or hear being discussed regarding the socialization aspect, particularly the way that it pertains to fitness, in our case, you know, strength training programming. So thing number one, about the socialization is when we're taking into account the autism and neurodivergent population, socialization might look and sound different for every individual. And we have this oftentimes very specific idea of or premise of what socialization should be for that individual. I'll give you an example. I've had some athletes who do not want to stand face to face with a peer or anybody else and have a conversation. They want to be on the periphery and they are happy to be a part of that group, but they don't want to go and have a direct conversation with every single person in that group. So that's something to take into consideration, that our idea of the ideal of socialization may not coincide with that particular individual's profile. So just by osmosis and having individuals in a group doesn't mean that it's going to automatically set up the best possible social situation for that. The other thing is the prioritization of fitness. If we are running fitness programming, the emphasis should be on delivering that training effect, getting the athletes stronger, more stable, improving those motor skills so that they generalize or carry over to activities of daily living. That is our primary goal. Socialization is a secondary goal when and where we can build it in. And it's not to say that even if we are working one-to-one with an athlete, there aren't social components. I'll give an example of that. In the gym where I work with my athletes one-to-one, there are plenty of social opportunities, whether it's with the front desk staff or with other coaches or even other members of the gym as well. It is a public environment, so there are multiple interactive opportunities for those athletes, and a lot of them have developed a great rapport with other coaches in the facility as well. So we have these naturalistic socialization opportunities that arise, and it doesn't need to be in a group training program. Now, some of the benefits of a group training program are the motivation aspect for a lot of athletes increases if they are in a group. If it works for them to be in a group, again, we want that hierarchy or that list of, is this athlete ready, so group readiness, to participate in a small class. Again, mid-size to large size, we start losing a lot, regardless of what anybody says. We start losing a lot of the advantages of being able to coach effectively. So it really creates some roadblocks there when we get over, I'd say, 5 or 6 athletes on average. Is it doable? Yes, but do we have to make some concessions there? Certainly. So let's get into programming a little bit. So how does programming differ between individual and group sessions? So not much in the way of exercise selection. So we don't need entirely different exercises, whether we're working with an individual or a group, or an individual opposed to a group. However, the way that we structure those exercises, so the actual program itself, might differ a little bit. And I'll give some examples. We have 3 different ways that we program exercises. So we have straight sets, which is do a set of squats, rest, do a set of squats, rest, do a set of squats, rest, and then maybe another set of squats, or moving on to the next exercise. Then we have supersets. Supersets can be highly effective, especially if there's a time constraint or if you're working with 1 or 2 athletes, because you can have one athlete doing a push-up and another athlete doing a cable row. You can use what we call antagonistic supersets, so a push and a pull, or an upper body exercise and a lower body exercise. That works really well. And you can do this throughout the program. So you can have one athlete doing one exercise, the other athlete doing the other exercise, and the advantage that it brings to you as the coach is you are able to bisect your attention and not have to confuse cues. If you have 2 athletes doing overhead presses at the same time and you say, arms up higher, those athletes might be confused as to who you are talking to in the moment. So you have an athlete who's already doing full range of motion overhead, but then they're hearing arms up higher, and it might be a point of questioning for them. Are you talking to them, or are you talking to the other athlete in that program? When you have two athletes doing different exercises, it lends a lot more to clarity and to who exactly you are speaking with about cues or about optimizing that exercise. So the use of language and the communication aspect of coaching is really well applied in that superset dynamic if you have two athletes. Supersets can actually absolutely work for one-to-one. However, in a group situation where you have two, sometimes even three athletes, that superset can work really well. And finally, we have circuits. Now, a circuit is 3 or more exercises put one after the other. So let's say the athlete starts with sandbell slams, and then they go to squats, and then they go to a heavy carry. The wonderful thing about circuits is if you have a group or a class or multiple athletes during that session, then each one of those athletes can be performing one of those exercises or taking a break if they need it at any particular point. So what it does is takes away one of the biggest things that we want to avoid in group training, which is a bottleneck, where individuals have to wait their turn for an extended period of time. So we're going on, 15, 20, 30 seconds that athlete is waiting to engage in that exercise. Now, when an athlete is waiting, it increases the likelihood of getting off task or getting dysregulated, and it also is taking away from the time that athlete could be practicing that or another exercise. Circuits work really well because you can have one athlete who's going to complete all the rounds of their exercises and come back to that first exercise and be ready to go. And you have another athlete who might take a little bit more time to complete each exercise. Maybe they get lost in transition from the first exercise to the second, but along the way, it's not stopping or creating an obstacle for anybody else to take their turn. The other advantage of circuits is that you can scale the exercises to any level of capability. So you have an athlete who's advanced and independent with those band rows. Great, they can be independent. You have another athlete who needs a little bit more guidance and support. They need some extra cues with that band row. Great, you can step in and provide that support. When you have a group situation, it's a lot more difficult to take data on and to progress or modify each exercise for every single athlete who is in that group. So you may want to choose 1 or 2 exercises as a focus or as a target for each athlete in that program, knowing full well that it's going to be impossible to progress or modify or coach every single repetition for every single athlete for every single set of the exercises that they're doing. Whereas in a one-to-one program, you can certainly do that in most scenarios. So another thing that we have to take into consideration is the adaptive profile. In Autism Fitness, we use our PAC profile to assess and address the 3 skills that really matter: physical, adaptive, and cognitive. So adaptive functioning is going to be a big one. Adaptive functioning we define as the motivation and focus of a particular athlete. And this is where that group readiness approach or that group readiness checklist really comes into play. If an athlete is prone to getting significantly dysregulated and they need a lot more one-to-one support, that's fine, but doesn't make sense for them to be in that group. That is probably the #1 consideration with respect to group programming. Now, I know I mentioned earlier that sometimes we have, as coaches, as professionals, we have control over this, and sometimes we do not. So we have to make it work, but this is a big consideration, especially when we do have control or we do have discretion about who is going to be in that group and who is not yet ready. It's not excluding them from the group. It's, do they currently have all of these skills and capabilities to participate meaningfully in a group, because if they are just in a group of 3 or 4 athletes and they're just standing around the whole time, congratulations, I mean that sarcastically, we're not getting anything accomplished. Where our goal, because we're talking about strength and fitness, is leading the athlete through the exercises so that they become more independent, more capable, and so that there is, to be redundant, a training effect, and they actually get stronger, more stable, develop more stamina, and develop motor control, so that these skills actually matter and show up in their activities of daily living. So nothing, generally speaking, should supersede that training effect. That is what we're after in fitness programming. So even though the socialization is oftentimes important and spoken about with such reverence, as, oh, we want, the socialization prospect, not if it is going to be in contention with the fitness component, because that is what we are doing, right? Running fitness programs. If there is a social program that happens to incorporate some exercises, I would say, okay, it's a social program that has exercise in it. I would not say that that is a predominantly exercise-based program. So I implore everybody to be very specific about what they're looking for, and at the same time what they're offering as well. So if our main goal is developing strength, developing motor skills, and delivering an outstanding fitness experience, then that needs to come first. Now, in a situation where you don't necessarily have control over the selection of all the athletes, case in point, most adapted PE curricula, we can still make progress. We just need to take into account each individual's PAC profile functioning, so their physical, adaptive, and cognitive in the way and as it relates to participation in fitness. When we have differing profiles, we have to decide what is going to be most meaningful and effective as far as goal setting for each individual. So for one individual, it might be just completing one set of each exercise during that session. Another athlete might be completing 3 or 4 sets of every exercise, and it's really important to utilize appropriate structure in that program, because if everybody is doing the same exercise at the same time, and you have one athlete who needs a lot of support and another athlete who's highly independent, it's going to be difficult to coach the same athletes at the same time with the same exercise, which is why we want to break it up and use supersets or use circuits with those groups of 2 or more athletes. All right, so those are a number of considerations, the differences between working one-to-one and group settings, from the physical aspect, from the adaptive or motivational aspect, the socialization aspect also, and then, of course, from a cognitive perspective, how everybody communicates, how they take in information. If you're working with an individual or group, you definitely want to have a visual schedule, whether it is pictures or text or both, so that everybody can follow along, because it's easy to get lost in the chaos at any given time, and we always want to come back to that structure so everybody can get out of the program what they need to get out of the program, and it makes our coaching job a lot easier. I'd love to know what you think of this. Leave your thoughts and your experiences in the comments below. If you have a topic you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday Training, leave that in the comments below. Also, I'd love to answer these questions. It's my favorite thing. And remember, of course, we are, I don't know why I said of course with that, but remember, we are on live on Instagram every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, to talk about our athletes and to answer your questions as well. And finally, if you are ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, look nowhere else than autismfitness.com. You can download the course syllabus, and then if you are all ready, you can register and begin your coursework today, and then meet me or one of our master level pros for your full day, hands-on virtual practical that you can take from anywhere in the world. Thanks again for watching. Please like, definitely subscribe. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you for watching.